Welcome into CBS Sports HQ. I am Jordan Giorgio alongside Haley Sutton. College football is officially over. As last night we crowned a national champion in the Ohio State Buckeyes. Next season cannot come soon enough, but luckily for us, we still have more football to watch as we take another step towards crowning a Super Bowl champion.
Yeah, congratulations to the Buckeyes first and foremost. What an incredible game. As Jordan mentioned, we're going to get into that in just a minute, but the focus right now on the NFL. There's only 4 teams left standing, Jordan, but for those other 28, the offseason activities have officially begun. 5 teams still looking for their new head coach, which takes us to the coaching carousel. We know Mike Vrabel kicked things off in New England as he was hired as the next head coach. Bears wasted no time locking up one of the top hires of the cycle in Ben Johnson. And Ben Johnson's already got to work, by the way, trying to bring in Dennis Allen and Darren Rizzi to fill some coordinator positions. We also know Aaron Glenn is another hot ticket item out of Detroit. He's been booked and busy since the Lions lost to Washington this weekend. And what about the Cowboys? A surprise guest has entered the chat. Certainly a lot to talk about as we get some clarity with our CBS Sports lead NFL insider, Jonathan Jones. JJ has been very busy over the last couple of weeks. And let's start the conversation with Aaron Glenn. JJ, we know that he is in the building interviewing with the Jets today. And one of the more popular talking points when it comes to Aaron Glenn and the Jets is the fact that they want to make sure he does not leave the building today without being their head coach. So I come to you here. What stands out to you about Aaron Glenn being that #1 target for the New York Jets? Excuse me.
Yeah, they certainly do want him to accept the offer that they ultimately are going to hand him, and so it's just a matter of if he does, right? I mean, I don't know what the state laws in New Jersey are surrounding kidnapping. I mean, they cannot keep him in the building if he wants to leave. But certainly the expectation around the league has been that there will be an offer that ultimately he will not refuse, that he will sign, that he is okay becoming, more than okay with becoming the next head coach of the New York Jets, the team that drafted him in the first round in 1994, team that he has a sentimental tie to, no question about it. Who will be the general manager? Well, Lance Newmark, who is the assistant GM of the Washington Commanders, if you look back, before he joined the Commanders, he was in Detroit for about a quarter century, so he and Aaron Glenn overlapped there for some time. And we see Aaron Glenn's resume there. Of course, a bitter taste in the mouth of all Lions fans after how things went on Saturday. However, of course, we know all the injuries that the Lions sustained this season. So Aaron Glenn has been a top candidate around the league this cycle. I would anticipate that the lean right now is that he could be the Jets head coach at any point today. There are going to be a number of people who would be surprised if he wound up leaving there without a contract. And if he does, that would be very, very good news for the New Orleans Saints, who certainly want to get an in-person audience with Aaron Glenn. But we will see, as it stands right now, mid-afternoon, whether Aaron Glenn will become the next Jets head coach.
Yeah, and you talked about his connections as a player there, too. Of course, spent 8 seasons as a DB before then returning on the coaching staff in 2012, 2013. But he also spent some time playing with the Saints, JJ, which leads us to our next talking point here. They want to have an in-person interview with this guy before, they move forward. If we talk about maybe some of the players on the roster, some of the guys have a little bit of an idea who they want to be their head coach. Let's look at Alvin Kamara's tweet from earlier today. He said, quote, my vote for head coach rhymes with fizzy. Of course, JJ, he is referring to Darren Rizzi, who is the interim head coach. I mentioned Ben Johnson trying to pluck him and bring him to Chicago. But we also know when it comes to the Saints, they're dealing with some weather issues right now. They're having to push that second interview back with Aaron Glenn to later in the week. So just walk us through the next steps here for Aaron Glenn if he were to interview in person in New Orleans.
So first of all, we'll start with Alvin Kamara's tweet about his pick is Darren Rizzi. That is under the assumption and belief, of course, that Aaron Glenn is going to take the New York Jets job. You mentioned, of course, Darren Rizzi. He has a number of offers that are out there. He's going to be able to have his pick of where he wants to become special teams coordinator, whether that's with the Denver Broncos, perhaps in San Francisco with the Niners, with Ben Johnson, certainly staying in New Orleans, potentially Miami, a number of different options for Darren Rizzi. Okay, let's talk now about the Saints and Aaron Glenn. On Saturday, the Lions lost. And that is when we all knew that the floodgates would open, that the jobs would come open rather quickly. We know the Chicago Bears hired Ben Johnson on Monday without even an in-person interview because the Bears wanted to pounce. They knew, of course, that the Raiders were involved, the Jaguars were involved. They did not want to waste any time. Well, the last couple of days, we've been able to see the weather forecast for New Orleans and surrounding areas, and they were anticipating some winter weather, some inclement weather. We know now that, of course, that weather, the forecast was accurate, that the airport has been shut down. They can't get guys into New Orleans. Should the Saints, though, have considered having some sort of home base set up elsewhere, somewhere in the United States, some sort of centralized location where they could have brought in Giants offensive coordinator Mike Kafka, or could have brought in Anthony Weaver with the Dolphins, and of course Aaron Glenn to get these in-person interviews taken care of? No, it wouldn't be in New Orleans with new facilities. And no, that's not necessarily the plan maybe that the Saints had when they were running what has been, I think, one of the truest and more thorough processes around the NFL. But if you want your guy, and by all accounts Aaron Glenn has been the guy for New Orleans, maybe there should have been a pivot over the past 72 or so hours, especially with the belief that Aaron Glenn is now going to the Jets. And so what do the Saints do? They're going to have to reset. And what I would sort of have perhaps at the top of their list as they have this reset, Joe Brady, the Bills offensive coordinator, whom they cannot talk to this week while the Bills are preparing for the AFC Championship game. They did have an initial interview with him. Also, Kellen Moore could be someone that they would want to speak with in person. Of course, can't speak with him this week because the Eagles are in the NFC title game. And lastly, you could have Mike McCarthy, the former Dallas Cowboys and Green Bay Packers head coach. He used to be the offensive coordinator in New Orleans in the pre-Sean Payton days. He could be a guy that they bring in person or go to in person. But a very interesting turn of events related to this weather that could mean that the Saints wind up missing out on what many believe to be their top guy, Aaron Glenn.
Yeah, kind of just a recurring theme when it comes to both Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. We knew that they were the top, I want to call them prospects, but they're not prospects, they're coaching hires, but the top hires in this cycle. You mentioned the Cowboys, though, JJ, so let's talk about it, right? Because who knows what's going on in Jerry Jones' mind right now? When we talked last, I told you I still think Kellen Moore is going to be the head coach as he continues, working around the NFL. But now Brian Schottenheimer, the current offensive coordinator, has jumped to being the betting favorite to land that head coaching job. Bring us up to speed here and try and take us inside Jerry Jones' mind here as he tries to fill that spot that Mike McCarthy left behind.
So they interviewed Kellen Moore virtually on Friday ahead of the Eagles divisional round game. They cannot speak again to Kellen Moore until next week at the very earliest. They brought in Robert Saleh on Saturday in person. They brought in Leslie Frazier in person on Monday. And now today, on Tuesday, perhaps even right now, Brian Schottenheimer, the offensive coordinator there the last couple of seasons, is interviewing for the Dallas Cowboys head coaching job. I've heard through many sources that for the Cowboys, one of the biggest factors is Dak Prescott not having to learn any new verbiage, that he has been sort of with the same offensive language throughout his entire career. Certainly, that would remain the same with Schottenheimer, the 51-year-old longtime assistant and coordinator in the NFL who has not yet gotten his head coaching opportunity, but may in this round with the Dallas Cowboys. A couple of things about him. He was actually voted in the top 5, I think even top 3 in the NFLPA survey among all players in terms of who their top offensive coordinator was. He earned that last year, and so well thought of by players. Certainly comes from Seattle and the Pete Carroll tree. We certainly know his lineage, Marty Schottenheimer, of course, and now the last couple of years working with Mike McCarthy, with the Dallas Cowboys, with Dak Prescott. Who knows what the next twist and turn is going to be with these Cowboys, how close, how far away they are from a hire, but that is where we stand right now, where the Cowboys are interviewing Brian Schottenheimer, and this their 4th known interview so far.
It is just a circus out in Jerry's world, but we'll have an answer sooner rather than later, I'm sure. You mentioned Marty Schottenheimer, of course, a big name in the head coaching world there, so he has that direct connection to his dad and the experience there. If we talk about the Jaguars, JJ, of course, they parted ways with Doug Peterson after 3 seasons in charge, and if we learned anything about Shad Khan in this process during the Doug Peterson era, you can tell that he wants to win and he's going to do whatever it takes to win there. So there's been a few names, a couple of second interviews that the Jacksonville Jaguars are dealing with right now. What can you tell us about their head coaching search right now?
Yeah, Shad Khan will do just about anything, but he will not part with general manager Trent Baalke, and perhaps that is something that wound up having the Jaguars miss out on Ben Johnson, miss out on a few coaching candidates. It has been made very clear to the candidates who have interviewed there in Jacksonville that Trent Baalke is not going anywhere, so he will be the general manager. Will Shad Khan be open to potentially adding someone in personnel who is familiar with the head coach? We'll see, but it doesn't seem that way right now. The 3 names that I can tell you that will be interviewing with the Jaguars for a second round in person, it will be Patrick Graham, who most recently was with the Raiders as defensive coordinator. You will continue on with Robert Saleh, the former Jets head coach, and Liam Cohen, the Buccaneers offensive coordinator. He had been with the Rams before, the University of Kentucky, had a fantastic season this year with Baker Mayfield and Tampa Bay. Really got that running game really going after several years where they just frankly were not able to get the running game going. So those are the names right now to keep a close watch on. Certainly Liam Cohen, with every source that I speak with, is at the top of the list for the Jaguars to help shepherd Trevor Lawrence in the post-Doug Peterson years. We will see, because I believe Liam Cohen's interview is on Friday, so they have an interview each day, Wednesday, Thursday, into Friday. Doesn't seem like the Jaguars are in a huge rush right now, but we could certainly see white smoke out of Jacksonville by the end of the week, and no one around the league will be surprised if it's Liam Cohen.
It's interesting, too, when you think about a head coach being fired, JJ. It's not just the coach that has been let go. It is an entire team of people, and I thought this was interesting in reading about those postseason meetings with Khan. He said basically replacing everybody that was left would amount to roughly 85 firings, but added, quote, "We need to get to work on something broken and continually be improving things that are working." So again, he is interested in finding a way to win. The good thing in Jacksonville, at least, JJ, jump in, please. Yeah.
And Haley, just real quick on that, because he did say that, and while I want to certainly be respectful of everyone's lives and livelihoods that are involved here, you know, you're talking about a coaching change. I remember in that interview where he said, yeah, we're going to change the training staff and the team doctors. No, you're not necessarily doing that. That's not what happens all the time in a coaching search. You don't have to, when you talk about a clean slate, that means general manager and head coach. So many times, a lot of these new head coaches will keep some of the assistant head coaches. The personnel staff more or less stays intact. And so I don't know that I necessarily agree with what Shad Khan was saying from a numbers perspective. I know a lot of people didn't. So it was a little curious. And when he said that, it became extremely clear, not only to myself, but to a number of people around the league, that there would be no changes at general manager. And again, that has certainly impacted the available pool of candidates available to the Jacksonville Jaguars.
It is quite the task, to your point, and so I am just glad that there are people hired to do that role, and you get to explain it to all of us here on CBS Sports HQ. Let's wrap up this conversation and talk about the Raiders, because they are in a similar boat. I think the only issue is they need help all across the board, JJ. It's not replacing just the head coach. It's the general manager. They need a quarterback. They need a star player on offense and on defense there, too. The Raiders, another team that missed out on the Ben Johnson sweepstakes. So where do they go from here?
So Tom Brady's been running things there with the Las Vegas Raiders. Mark Davis has certainly been sitting in on these interviews, as well as 3 billionaire minority owners with the Raiders, brand new over the last couple of months. Look, Tom Brady's calling the shots, and so at general manager, there is a belief that it could wind up being John Spytek, who is the assistant GM with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was involved in bringing Brady to Tampa. Also, interestingly enough, they played together at Michigan all those years ago. So there's a lot of familiarity there. But, a number of other qualified gentlemen interviewed there for general manager, including the Giants AGM Brandon Brown, the Chargers assistant general manager Chad Alexander, among others. As far as the head coach goes, I would certainly have Pete Carroll at the top of the list for the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders did want Ben Johnson. Clearly, Ben Johnson wasn't interested in going there for any number of reasons. But Pete Carroll, who would be the oldest coach in the NFL if he gets hired this cycle, we could see him return to the NFL and be that change agent, that culture changer with the Las Vegas Raiders. Haley, I've talked a number of times on here about the AFC West. It is probably the toughest division in football year in, year out because of the quarterbacks and because of the head coaches. When you look at Andy Reid, Sean Payton, and Jim Harbaugh, almost anyone you hire would automatically be the worst head coach in that division. But you bring in Pete Carroll, and that's not necessarily going to be the case. We certainly will see as the Raiders continue to move forward, again, led by Tom Brady, if they can land Pete Carroll.
Listen, until I see Bill Belichick out there in UNC gear coaching the team, I am not letting that rumor die. Tom Brady works hard, but our Jonathan Jones works harder. JJ, thanks so much for hopping on HQ, helping us stay up to date with the ever-spinning coaching carousel in the NFL. One final look here as you take a look at the positions that have been filled. I mentioned it earlier. Mike Vrabel was the first coach hired in this cycle. He takes over for Gerard Mayo to lead the Patriots. We also saw the Bears jump on Ben Johnson quickly and in a hurry, so he is off the board. The question is, who will take over some of these other positions? We'll have to see as the puzzle pieces continue to fill in.